Thank you, and welcome back to the continuation of the Committee of the Whole meeting for May 26, 2020. For members of the public tuning in, my name is Doug Race. I am the acting mayor this month, and according to our policy, will be chairing the Committee of the Whole meeting this afternoon. First up in the agenda is Safe Routes to School, item 4 sub 1. Staff, you may take it away.
Good afternoon. I'm Dora Gunn, a Sustainability Coordinator with the District of Squamish. I see that my slides are now up. That's great. So today I'm going to provide an update on some of the work the district has been doing to improve safe routes to school in the last year, as well as what we have coming up next. I'm not going to address any recent site-specific traffic calming concerns in my presentation, but perhaps if Council would like, these can be discussed afterwards. Next slide, please. So the district has been working to promote safe routes to school for many years and completed the school travel planning project for 6 elementary schools between 2015 and 2018. It was a highly collaborative process. It involved students, parents, teachers, principals, the school district, and a number of external partners. The overall goal of the project was to increase active transportation to and from schools, and it resulted in the development of a best routes map and a school travel plan for each school. The district has been working to gradually implement many of the actions in the plan since 2016. And then in Council last spring, we revisited some of the progress that had been made to that point and also heard from school representatives, PACs, and community members. Next slide, please. The types of actions that are recommended in the school travel plans include things like infrastructure, so crosswalks, sidewalks, speeding and parking enforcement, considerations for future projects that the district or developers might undertake, and then also education and events. By the end of 2020, the district will have spent more than $2 million on infrastructure projects that contribute to safe routes to school. That includes projects that are underway this year. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to provide an overview of the capital projects that we've been working on since our last council meeting, and then I'll move on to the non-capital projects. The priority for capital projects is based on recommendations in the school travel plans, the district's active transportation plan, and then synergies with other capital projects like paving, water, and sewer. Sometimes opportunities arise as part of those other capital projects that might not have been at the top of the safe routes to school list, but we still like to take the opportunity to implement them when we can. And then we also try to focus our efforts across multiple schools or neighborhoods each year. Next slide, please. So starting with some of the projects that are completed, last summer we widened a section of Guildford Drive. That was part of a paving project. And we created a space specifically for biking and walking on one side of the road. We had to remove some street parking there to do that. So there's street parking on one side and then the walking and biking lane on the other side. We did a similar project on Judd Road as part of a sewer project where we created a bike lane that people can also walk in. And so, yeah, there was no space at all for pedestrians or cyclists previous to these projects on these sections of road. Next slide, please. We also upgraded the section of the Discovery Trail that runs beside Dentville. We're eventually planning to connect this section to the section that's in front of Howesound Secondary and Squamish Elementary in the next couple of years, and then ultimately further north as well. We developed a new trail, the other image, that links Pemberton Avenue with Hunter Place. This is a real win. It provides a new route for Valley Cliff and Hospital Hill residents to access Squamish Elementary and Howesound Secondary, so they can go under the highway at the underpass there, across this path, and then over at the Cleveland and Buckley intersection. Next slide, please.
Did I hit 2 by accident?
So projects that our capital team is working on right now include a multi-use path on the east side of Government Road between Depot and Axon. That's the first image. And then a curb bulge to make it safer for pedestrians crossing Government Road at Axon. These are actually really recent images. This is sort of what it looks like out there right now while it's under construction. This is a really important route to Brackendale Elementary and Don Ross Middle School. Next slide, please. These are not the greatest images, but I have a little capture of a design that's for some improvements at Guilford Drive near Clark Drive. And the thing that's going to really help Safe Routes here is we're going to improve the crosswalk there as well as improve the lighting. And then lastly, we're going to light the section of the Discovery Trail that we built last year. So the section in Dentville will be lit by the end of this year. Next slide, please. So now moving on to the non-capital projects. So we had some discussions in council about this last year, but I'll just, for the public that are watching, I'll remind folks of what we've done. So we changed the school zones. The default school zones are 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. We extended those to 7:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. And that's to capture the before and after school care, as well as any activities that might be happening at the schools after school. We improved the signage, so we made it larger and easier to read. And we also added the times onto the signs. And then we installed the centerline signs, which were quite noticeable. They've been an interesting maintenance challenge, but they definitely help folks to remember that they're in a school zone. And then lastly, we merged 2 school zones on Westway Avenue. Next slide, please. In education enforcement, we did a Slow Down Squamish campaign in September 2019. This was to remind folks that school was back in session and also to let them know about the changes to the school zones. There was increased RCMP and bylaw enforcement in the school zones, particularly in the September and January back-to-school periods, but it was ongoing throughout the year. We installed speed reader boards. These are temporary speed reader boards that we put up in different places around the community. In the last year, they've been in place near Garibaldi Highlands Elementary, Ballycliffe Elementary, Brackendale Elementary, and Mamclam Elementary. And last year, before school started, we redistributed the materials that had been produced through the school travel planning program. So that was the best routes maps and the school travel plans. Next slide, please. A couple of additional actions. We recently brought a report to council outlining some of the options for traffic calming on Highlands Way North, which has been a big concern related to Safe Routes to School, as well as a plan for how to approach Perth Drive. And the next step on this project is public consultation. And then lastly, we installed a 4-way stop at Dowwood Drive and Tantalus Road, which is near the Squamish Montessori School. Next slide. So upcoming projects, we're going to continue work on the current capital projects that I mentioned earlier. We're planning to hire a consultant to help us to update the best routes maps. There's been a lot of work done, so some of them aren't as up to date as they could be. So we'll update those. And then also the same consultant would initiate school travel planning for 2 new schools. So we haven't reached out to these schools yet, but we are anticipating reaching out to the Squamish Montessori School and the Squamish Waldorf School. We will be starting the summer, or late summer, starting to plan for the 2021 capital projects, so using the prioritization that I mentioned earlier to do that. And then we're also planning to run the Slow Down Squamish campaign again in September 2020. And that's all I have for my presentation right now. I'll turn it over to the chair.
Thank you. Council, any questions or comments?
The consultant that will be doing the work on updating the maps, is there capacity in that contract to also look at finding our champions in each of the schools? So this was brought up when we first engaged in the Safe Routes to School program, that without engaged parents and teachers and administrators and PACs, behavior change doesn't happen, and the district can't do this on its own. And it doesn't matter how much we engineer the streets, if people aren't willing to change their habits, if people aren't willing to start walking school buses, all that sort of thing, we're not going to see more kids on our sidewalks and on their bikes. So is there capacity to look at that, sort of finding those champions in this contract?
Go ahead, Ms. Gunn.
Through the chair, thank you. I hadn't actually anticipated that, but we haven't written the RFP yet, so it might be possible. We also do have just a slight bit more capacity in the sustainability group right now than we have in previous years. So we may be able to take on some of that work, possibly ourselves as well, which in some ways would be an advantage because we would have then a contact here on staff who could keep that going over the years, whereas the consultants would be only for a number of months. So we can definitely take that away and figure out how best to do that.
Thank you.
Councillor Pettengill, Councillor Stoner.
So a couple things. First, a question and then a combo question comment, I think. When I was looking, I saw some of the, in the report, a list of some of the things we've completed. Have we attempted to do any metrics on changes in speed compliance, changes in accident rates, changes in the number of kids, how they're getting to school and mode shift and that sort of thing? Or are there plans to start tracking some of that?
The chair, yes. So we do look at speeds fairly regularly. We did look at some of the changes in the speeds with some of the changes in the school zones that we made. So we do have that information. We don't have much in the way of crash data. I'm not sure if somebody else on the call can speak to that, but I don't believe there is a lot of crash information in Squamish. And that's not something that I have looked at myself. And then there was another thing you mentioned. Sorry, can you?
Mode shift, so how kids are getting to school.
Yeah. So mode shift is actually something that we wanted to look at through the climate action plan. It's one of the actions listed there. So we have started to look into how we could possibly go about measuring mode shift in Squamish more holistically. And hopefully, I'm hoping that we can put together a proposal to include in the budget for next year, a proposal of how we could do that.
Okay, thank you. Because I think that's important understanding. Are we actually having the impact we want to have for all these changes? The other one, and it came up in the discussion last year, I think there was some comments from the community, I guess, about not understanding or not necessarily agreeing with provincial or federal guidelines which seem to dictate the geography of a school zone, where that is, and then other roads should be 50 kilometers and so on, and why can't we make everything 30? And I've been reflecting on that conversation a bit, and I think one of the responses from our engineering department at the time was I believe it's the federal guidelines, we're kind of working with best practices in terms of speed limits and sizes of school zones and so on. But I started thinking, well, I think a lot of those guidelines were written in a car-centric context. And as we're trying to move beyond that, as we're looking for all kinds of co-benefits moving away from cars, we seem to have a demand for lower speeds. What can we do? What do you need from council to be able to sort of look past those guidelines to less car-centric guidelines? And we've established feeder routes and collector routes, but again, that's in a very car-centered context. If we take away that context, do we still want or need those feeder roads, and then how does that shape our future community development? So I think this is a much bigger topic. I'm just trying to sort of introduce the concept and challenge the idea of feeder streets and challenge the idea maybe we can go to 30 in a lot more places. And so what do we need to do to start looking at that?
I'll go to Mr. Wickham.
That is a great and timely question. Thank you, Councillor Pettengill. Through the chair, we have been tasked by council to look into the practicalities and legalities of reducing speeds on a wider basis throughout Squamish. There are a couple of examples of one-offs where speeds have been reduced, but looking at what to do with the district as a whole. And so we are looking to come back to council for a more holistic view of speed limits throughout the district, hopefully in July committee of the whole, so that we can have sort of a conversation about that, completely related to obviously safe routes to school, but a larger discussion about pedestrian and cycling safety and mode shift throughout the district.
Okay. Councillor Stoner.
My question was going to be about when we were going to have a conversation about reducing speed limits across the district. And Mr. Wickham just answered it, so I'm good, thanks.
Okay. Councillor French.
I'm wondering about those centerline banner device things. Are they meant to be installed year-round permanent, or do they come out in July and August when there is no school in session?
Go ahead,
Through
Ms.
the
Gunn.
chair, they can be removed. We hadn't anticipated taking them in and out in the summer. We had contemplated taking them in and out actually in the winter for snow clearing, although the way it worked out, it actually seems that the clouds just go around them and it actually seems to turn out largely okay. So no, we're intending to leave them in, but the school zone does not apply when school is not in session.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Stoner.
I have another question now that I remember. I appreciate the breakdown of the work that has been done to date. And Ms. Gunn, you mentioned the prioritization scheme that you have, and I think we've seen a snapshot of it in a past meeting. Perhaps you showed us the long list. I think my question is would it be possible as we go into the next budget cycle to have some measure of like where you're coming in with your budget ask relative to getting everything on that list complete? My question, like, I'm curious to see how far we are, and appreciate the mayor's earlier comments that we can't engineer our way out of all of this, but I am curious with the number of requests that we have come through, and how long that prioritization list is how far we are from actually achieving it all.
Through the chair, so there is a list related to safe routes to school, and then there's a larger list that's related to active transportation in general. It would be possible for me to provide an update on the safe routes to school list more specifically. Is that what you were asking? Yes. It's an interesting challenge. It's something I absolutely could do, and I could bring that back to council potentially in the fall. The types of items that are on that list are extremely variable in type and scope. So there's little things like repainted crosswalk up to massive redesigns of intersections and that kind of thing. So even if you did, let's say, half of the items, it wouldn't necessarily mean that you've done half the work, for example, just because of the difference. But nonetheless, it is something I could bring back to council.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Follow up on that. And I don't mean it to be a make-work project, and I don't want it to be difficult, but I think when we do come back to this conversation in budget, is just having some sort of reference of like, how far is this getting us down that list, so that we can kind of weigh, do we need to put more or less money towards it?
No response? Okay. And I just, sorry, I thought you were just about to say something. But I just wanted to ask about the consultation that we anticipate taking place this year with respect to the Highlands Way North area. We had a presentation on that a few weeks ago. My recollection is that staff were intending to start that relatively soon. And my question would be, do we anticipate having recommendations come out of that in time for the budget process next year?
Yes, you are the chair, so I can't say through the chair. Yes, the intention is that we will have something in the budget process for next year. I can't 100% speak to how that timing is going to work out, but the plan was to have the consultation underway shortly, and then have something in the budget. We will have something in the budget for sure, regardless of where we are at with the consultation.
Thank you. Councillor Pettengill.
Thank you. I guess it was last week when we were talking about the Highlands Way in and around Garibaldi Highlands, and I think got a bit preoccupied with the adventure zone because there's some other reason that people are going to that school that I was aware of, and I realized after They have a French immersion program there, which I understand has a big catchment and a big draw. And I sort of was kicking myself for not mentioning that piece, because I think that speaks to where a significant amount of traffic is coming from. But then it leads me to wonder, are we starting to, or do we now, when schools are talking about programming and where they're going to do this sort of programming and that, are we having conversations about how we might need to adjust roads around the schools, or are we not quite there yet?
Through the chair. So just to clarify, do you mean speaking with the school district about where their programming might occur into the future and then how our roads might feed into that?
Yeah, because if I think about an immersion, I assume we're not going to have French immersion at every school, and so if they move that program around, you could somewhat significantly change the traffic patterns in a way that really impacts students. And so, do we have a mechanism to coordinate some of that?
Yeah, that's a really great question, actually, and it's not something that it's not a conversation that I personally have had with the school districts. I'm not sure if Chris or Gary have had any conversations with the school district about that. No. But it's something that is a great idea and something we should do, absolutely.
So, seeing nothing further, there's no resolution. This is receipt for information, Council. Thank you very much, Ms. Gunn. Whoops, sorry. The mayor had her hand up.
We did have the incident over the weekend, and I'm wondering if there are any short-term measures that staff are looking at to address the speed coming off the boulevard or from the roundabout onto the boulevard.
I believe Mr. Wickham is going to speak to you about that one.
Go ahead.
Yes, we've been looking at that zone for some time now. It's an area of concern. Since we're talking safe routes to school here, largely the crosswalks are both across the boulevard and also across Perth. It's a bit of an unusual situation, and Councillor Pettingill brought up the federal guidelines, that the Transportation Association of Canada guidelines, which take into account sort of a typical setup. Earlier this week, given the incident and given the attention that traffic in the area and around the schools is getting in the neighborhoods in the last few days, we brought together the team again and looked at the numbers, looked at the guidelines, maybe leaned on the numbers a little bit, and we do believe that we can justify a school zone in that area, both down the boulevard between the two traffic circles, and also the lower section of Perth, just given the volume of children moving through those areas before and after school.
I think that would be
Yes.
Is there any timeline for that you can provide us with?
I can't at the moment. The final decision is literally hours old. So we basically we're delegated by council to be able to put these up, so we don't have to come back to council for any further decisions or anything like that. We can just go and do it. The question is basically how quickly we can source the signs, etc., to get them out there. And then I guess tactical decision on whether we get them out there a week before school ends or whether we wait until sometime in August to get people used to them. So we'll have to put our heads together and decide what the best course of action is.
Thank you. Councillor Herford.
Thank you. With this, I know that earlier in our conversation here, we spoke about district-wide speed, as we do have these issues sort of throughout our community. And in today's discussion around the safe routes to school, I was just really thinking about what that combination of engineered, solutions and behavioral change looks like, and ways that we can ramp up the behavioral change side, whether that's social. I don't know whether that's led by who leads that, whether that's led by a PAC or in some areas there's this sort of work is pushed a lot by like a cycling coalition or someone that really takes that on the other side, which is sort of a specific piece that we as a district don't. I mean, we do some of, and I appreciate the work on the slow down Squamish effort. But are there community groups to that have this specific interest that we can try to I almost said rope in to help us with this, but that we can leverage their some resources, whether that be boots on the ground or through social media or anything that we're aware, that staff's aware of or has reached out to staff?
Through the chair, so I believe the PACs are a great resource for anything near schools. And then outside of that, Squamish Ken does have a group that's their transportation and energy group. And they have, for example, they put on that cycling infrastructure event last year, I believe it was. So they could be a resource as well. I'm not aware of any others that specifically focus on this type of thing in Squamish.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm mindful of time, Council. We're now conveniently 45 minutes late on our agenda, but thank you, Ms. Gunn. It was very timely, I think, all things considered, and so looking forward to see this unroll as it comes out. Thank you. We'll move on to item 4, sub 2, Arts, Culture, and Heritage Strategy, draft 2. Somebody's there.
Natasha's there, but not Sarah.
Hi, Devin is there in the other room,
Okay.
and they may not be streaming, so I'm just going to go pop over really quick and get the log on.
Sure, we'll just wait for you.
No,
Sorry.
Hello, Council, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, Council, and for those watching at home, my name is Sarah Dicker, and I am currently the Acting Manager of Arts and Culture for the District of Squamish. I'm joined today by Devin Guest, Director of Recreation, and also by Natasha Golbeck, GM for Community Services in the District of Squamish. Today I'm here to present the Arts, Culture, and Heritage Strategy 2020.
too many mics.
Sarah, have you got too many mics on?
No, someone walked in the room, I think.
Oh, or somebody else walked in the room?
Hopefully we should be good now.
That sounds better. Yep, thank you.
Sorry about that. So would you like me to begin again, or can I
Oh, we
continue?
heard that part. You can keep going.
Okay, perfect. We can move to the next slide, please, Rob.
Okay.
Thank you. So today I'm here to present the Arts, Culture, and Heritage Draft 2 for Council's feedback before we enter the final engagement phase and for future adoption.
We'll be covering the process, the methodology, a review of council feedback from the first draft, the restructure of the strategy, and community roles, as well as the sector aspirations. Next slide.
And I'll also interject, once again, when we're talking about feedback, we'll go through the process of trying to summarize the feedback that staff have heard through the meeting before we actually vote on anything. So staff can just try to note some of the points that come out. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we begin, I just wanted to note that it's important to acknowledge the current global pandemic that we are presented with, and that a resilient cultural sector becomes more important in times of trial. During COVID-19, we've seen our community react to support each other to lift spirits through art, in particular the painted rocks that have been placed around the trail. This strategy aims to provide guidance and to build upon the foundation of Squamish's arts, culture, and heritage platform. Next slide, please. So for those at home, an overview of the process so far. We began in April 2019 with discovery and research, followed by community engagement, stakeholder engagement, a strategy development phase in December to January, the initial draft presented to Council in January 2020, and now we are on the second draft of the strategy. Next slide, please. And for those at home, I'll just quickly cover the methodology behind the strategy. So the broad community engagement consisted of a community-wide survey structured with 8 questions, allowing for ample open-ended comments. Questions consisted of 3 parts that addressed the current state of the sector, future aspirations, and existing barriers. The survey was a great success and closed at over 889 responses. Findings were presented to Council on October 22nd, 2019. Next slide, please. We then began some stakeholder interviews, which presented the results of the community survey in order to ground truth them. The survey results were shared with the stakeholders, and we collected that feedback in order to move forward into the stakeholder workshop. Majority of stakeholders echoed similar sentiments that were seen in the survey results. Next slide. We then held a series of stakeholder workshops in order to identify key strategic areas of the strategy. A workshop facilitator was brought in, and exercises were held to identify which strategies are most important and how they can be achieved and by who. Stakeholders prioritized several strategies under each theme, and stakeholders also identified how the strategies could be achieved and by who. Next slide. So initially, we used this information to present to Council the first draft, and we received quite a bit of valuable feedback that was very specific on the initial draft and included a desire to see long-term aspirations for the arts, culture, and heritage sector, local government more in a support role with emphasis shift to other leaders in the community, heritage better integrated into the strategy and needs addressed in a realistic manner, community enhancement grant language not appropriately placed in the first draft, and then sponsorship and events also being more of a community role rather than a district role. Next slide. So following Council's feedback, staff reframed the strategy to include more detail. The draft seeks to treat arts, culture, and heritage as one sector with objectives, actions, tactics, and roles sought to strengthen the whole sector. The introduction of roles were seen as an important step to elevate awareness of the importance of each segment of the community in the success of the strategy. Next slide, please. New to this draft, we established the state of the sector, community aspirations, community roles, timelines for tactics, culture and our economy, a glossary, as well as a methodology. Next slide, please. The initial draft was structured with 3 tiers, being objectives, strategies, and actions. The new draft is structured similarly, but with a little bit more detail, moving to objectives, actions in the place of strategy, tactics and roles, which strengthen the actions. Next slide, please, sorry. So the full strategy component consists of vision and mission, objectives, actions, tactics, and roles. Next slide, please. The values and guiding principles were presented in the initial draft and remain to be the same, being diversity and inclusion, partnership and collaboration, the optimization of social ROI, and creative and open. Next slide, please. The vision and mission were established early in the process and endorsed at stakeholder workshops. These will remain the same for this draft of the strategy. Next slide, please. The strategic objectives will also be carried through to this draft and are cultivate vitality, nourish connectivity, and optimize space. You'll see by this slide that each objective is represented by a color. Yellow being cultivate vitality, teal being nourish connectivity, and blue being optimize space. This is carried through the document. Next slide, please. As previously mentioned, new to this strategy are community roles. The ability to help achieve the goals of this strategy lies within every member of our community. It will take a strong collaborative effort to achieve the actions and tactics laid out in this document, along with other long-term aspirations of the arts, culture, and heritage community. For the purposes of simplifying the roles, the following categories were created: the arts and culture sector, business sector and individual funders, District of Squamish and other levels of government, general public, and participants in arts, culture, and heritage experiences. It is important to note in this strategy that this is not a master plan. The roles are not directional or supposed to assign tasks. They're communicating ideas of how the community can collaborate to achieve the goals of the strategy. Roles are based on research, community engagement, and stakeholder workshops. Next slide, please. So, as mentioned previously, throughout the strategy, cultivate vitality is represented by yellow, nourish connectivity is represented by teal, and optimize space is represented by blue. As we go through the actions and tactics, you will notice that some tactics are bolder and some are lighter. This represents the tactic outlook. The bolder the colors, the shorter the time frame. Each objective has 2 actions and multiple tactics. For the purposes of timing, I will go through the actions and not each tactic, as there are many. Cultivate vitality. Next slide, please. Cultivate vitality. Action 1. Animate the community with a blend of programs, services, and events that is diverse and inclusive and offers opportunities to all residents, visitors, and takes into account Squamish's growing community. Next slide, please. Action 2, under Cultivate Vitality. Foster partnerships and collaborations for the provision of cultural programs, events, and venues. Next slide, please. Nourish connectivity. Foster strong collaboration and connection between arts, culture, and heritage producers to create synergies and elevate cultural awareness. Next slide, please. Action 4. Cultivate stronger awareness of arts, culture, and heritage experiences for audiences, residents, and participants. Next slide, please. Action 5. Connect citizens through facilities, programs, and gathering spaces to create community. And next slide, please. Action 6, under Optimize Space, establish the future direction for the development of or redevelopment of cultural facilities. And next slide, please. Feedback from council also indicated a desire to identify more long-term community aspirations. These aspirations were identified in the community engagement phases, and while they may not be achieved within the lifespan of this document, we feel that they add value in acknowledging the long-term hopes for the sector. They are broken down into a number of categories, being connection, events, capacity, Indigenous voices, heritage, diversity, and space. Next slide, please. We would also like to acknowledge that this strategy would not have been possible without some real dedication from our stakeholder groups. They are acknowledged within this strategy. Next slide, please. And finally, we would like to present the recommendation that the draft Arts, Culture, and Heritage Strategy be presented to the public for feedback prior to being received by Council at a future regular business meeting. I'll now take questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you. So Council, to try to put a little order to this process, perhaps we could focus on questions to start with, and then we'll come back for comments and allow staff to organize them that way. Anybody have a question? Mayor Elliott.
Under the key principles that guided the development of this strategy, there was just one sentence that I agree with, but also stumbled over. And that was when it references Squamish, Oweomeo, cultural stewardship is foundational to this territory. And as the original and rightful caretakers of this land, their leadership and teaching should be woven through all community, cultural, historical, and artistic initiatives. And I guess the part I trip over is how non-Indigenous artists do that. And so I'm wondering what is meant by that sentence. Because teachings are generally shared only by certain members. They belong to particular members of the First Nation, so they wouldn't be shared in this way. So yeah, the intent behind that principle would be great.
Ms. Goldbeck?
Oh, Ms.
You're mute.
Oh, Devin, guest.
Sorry, I feel like I can speak to that. Certainly that principle is an aspirational thing, and one of the things we learned in our decolonizing practices training that we've done as district staff is that it is the responsibility of the non-Indigenous people to seek and request wisdom and guidance about how to have cultural humility and understanding in as we carry out work that is relevant and important to the Squamish Nation, and certainly arts and culture is relevant and important to the Squamish Nation. So the aspirational statement is meant to reflect that it is the mainstream community's responsibility to seek that guidance, and it is an aspiration of ours to promote that through principle-based work.
So I just wonder if that language could be a little bit more clear, because I think that your comments capture that more clearly for me than what's written there. And then also, Tactic 1.2 is about exploring and pursuing partnership opportunities that support access to Squamish Nation cultural and creative programs. And the roles of each of the people are spelled out quite nicely. But I think what's missing for me is the education part. So we've worked hard at the district to educate ourselves on the impacts of colonialism and understanding how that has impacted our local First Nations. And I think actually that could be captured in this section, that the education piece comes first.
Yeah, good feedback, thank you.
I love the report. It looks great, and it was really easy to read. So I appreciate the effort that went into this draft. It looks really fantastic.
Thank you. Councillor Stoner, Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. Through the chair,
I'll echo the mayor's comments that this version of the draft is very well put together and was much easier to read. So thank you for the effort. My questions are mostly around the outlook and the timelines that are provided in Appendix A, and I'm just curious if the staff can explain a little bit what criteria they use to assess the timelines of those outlooks. To me, it seems like those that are there aren't many in that 1 to 3 year time frame, and I appreciate that we don't have a huge amount of capacity and we don't have a huge amount of control over a lot of these things. And so I'm just curious if staff can speak to why some things fell in the 1 to 3 year versus if I look at tactic 1.3, for example, I'm curious why that would take 4 to 6 years, which is nurture the development of programs and events that aim to engage youth in ACH experiences and activities.
Go ahead, Ms. Dicker.
The work that we're currently trying to establish is foundational, and given that this draft is the first strategy that the district is having, we're building upon our foundation, and we're trying to implement programming and these tactics throughout our work. And in order to do so, a lot of the work that we're building upon will be over the next 1 to 3 years, building those foundations, and then at the 3 years kind of timeline where this strategy will be reviewed, a lot of the secondary tactics will start to be phased in. And the tactic outlooks are supposed to be guidelines. They're not. We may achieve more than what we have set out to achieve within the first 3 years. However, we're just trying to be realistic rather than too optimistic on what can be achieved within the 3 year period.
Go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you, and appreciate the realistic timelines. I'll use tactic 1.3 again as an example, though. So, youth programming has been called out in Council's strategic plan as a key area. As you well know, the Squamish Arts Council also has youth programming as part of their strategic plan, and so I'm just curious why that then gets pushed to the 4 to 6 years if it has been identified as kind of core to both partners.
Go ahead.
Thank you for your feedback on that. I think that we could revise that and consider moving that into an earlier category. Thank you.
Finish, Councillor Stoner? Yep. Councillor Anderson, Councillor Pettengill.
Thank you. Sarah Dicker, this report is just super in its format and presentation. And I think it can stack up against from anywhere else in the province. It really is a wonderful presentation. And I have 3 questions. One is concerning the way that official community plan policies are cited. Should we not be citing the policies in addition to objectives? It's just a small point, but if the public were to read these and say, well, are we leaving out this or that, so that in both of the report to council and in the strategy document, only the objectives are cited, the 27.1. However, the policies are omitted, 27.2, and so on through that chapter of the OCP. So whether the citing of the OCP should be more comprehensive, at least not to mislead. I'm not sure whether this comes up elsewhere in presentations and citings of the OCP. I just thought that perhaps the policy should be cited in addition to the objectives.
That's a good point, and we can consider that in the final draft.
The second question I have concerns the definition page of what is heritage. It comes up on page 9. The numbers are quite small, but I did happen to see it's page 9 and page 19 of 87 for our document today. And there's 2 questions for me that come up here. When you distinguish between cultural heritage and built heritage, it strikes me that there's a gray area for archives. because archives capture our storytelling, our traditions in written form. They're preserved, and that can include preserved oral videotapes and audio tapes and so on. But we contrast and say built heritage is often coupled with conservation, but surely archives and as a part of cultural heritage are also connected to conservation. So perhaps there's some clarity that might be introduced to there as we consider archives. In the same section, when we state that built heritage is often coupled with conservation, I wonder how we might consider geological features and viewscapes, whether they are also, obviously, we are interested in conserving them or managing them, but they're not built heritage. So just these couple of things that came up for me in that section on the definition. I have a final quick question. When the Marine Action Strategy, I didn't leave you to answer that, but perhaps it was more of a comment and an observation. Another question I have is whether something might be considered for facilities. As with the Marine Action Strategy, there are many facilities questions. They were diverse, and they didn't have clear answers. And so the solution for the Marine Action Strategy was to list these facilities with no priorities, just the ones that came up, in fact, many times, some of them, in the course of the feedback and input, and they were placed in an appendix. So we have Appendix 2 for the Marine Action Strategy lists all these facilities that everybody was talking about. Clearly, some of them are pressing, but there's no action plan, or there can't be at this time. So my question is whether it might be considered for this report to list facilities that keep coming up in conversation for the performing arts community, archives, storage for the theater group, and perhaps consider something like an appendix so that we can address, and I believe it was Councillor Rayson asked last time, the desirability of a wish list for our planning purposes and to keep these items fresh in our conversations. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Councillor Pettengill.
Thank you, and I was very impressed with the changes since the last time we saw this. It's come a long way, so thank you. And a few things that did jump out at me. I've been thinking a lot about in COVID and as we move forward, where our priorities lie. And so in the roles, it did stick out to me that we've got the business sector and funders, and I understand we do need to pay for things somehow, but the sort of social services aspect, I'm wondering if that's a missing piece there, and if do you think there's an opportunity to include that? Because as I see it, art is part of building that community, building some capacity to process challenging things, to work our way through, and it seems that there's a strong alignment and value there. And so as we think about moving forward, do you think that's a piece we could or should add in there maybe in the roles?
I think that we categorize the roles just for simplicity. I think that the social services sector could fall within other levels of government for the purposes of the strategy. But I do recognize your point. I'm just not sure if we would consider that as a category on its own. But thank you for your feedback.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, and I would be inclined to shine a bit more of a light on that piece of it. That's me personally. The other piece, I'm wondering how the spaces, some of the spaces, actions, and so on might impact our zoning bylaw, ADP, and some of these other committees. And so a couple of examples, OCM and Anthony Park, some very simple things like some electrical outlets on the pillars would make a big difference in terms of doing a lot of things. So, it's a pretty small thing, but if that sort of information or thought was at the ADP, I can see that really helping us with spaces. So is there an expectation that would filter through? And then sort of bigger scope, I've spoken about how I'm not sure that our zoning bylaw is getting the right balance between light industrial and office. I think a lot of for-profit, not-for-profit art programming and operations and so on would best align in terms of what they need to do with our light industrial space, but our permitted uses don't necessarily align with that. So, you know, do you see this inform our zoning bylaw permitted uses and that kind of work we're doing right now?
Yes. So the idea behind the strategy is that the district will now have a document where staff and the community can consult in order to move forward with any work. And so this document should be considered by other district staff in any ongoing work. In particular, you've mentioned the zoning bylaw and perhaps the advisory design panel. The advisory design panel works off of the established development permit area guidelines, which planning informs. And so that would filter through if any zoning amendments are made, that would then inform the advisory design panel in their work.
Thank you.
So Council, seeing no more hands, those are questions. I know some of you snuck your comments in there anyway, but are there any further comments you would like to make? Councillor Bendale. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. So one other piece, you know, I know I've been at a couple of presentations, actually, I think, Ms. Dicker, you are at one of them as well, around the First Nations Guardians program. So I see that as a cultural piece that's happening kind of within Squamish Nation, although more members as opposed to a formal thing at this point. But it seems to align well with some of our concerns around camping and those sorts of things too. I went as part of that presentation for I'm not sure if the terminology is right, but a botany tour of the estuary. And so I was thinking about, you know, educating people in terms of off-leash dogs. So there's the cultural component, but all sorts of other things. So I guess I'm wondering, when I read the presentation, it sounds like some of the indigenous aspects of this are more aspirational and a little further off in the future. But I'm wondering if we're paying enough attention soon enough to some of those things, and whether or not these specific programs are something we should get involved in. You know, is there opportunity right now that it makes sense to somehow include this, or am I mistaken about the timeline piece there?
So the question or comment?
I'm going to respond to that on behalf of Ms. Dicker. I think in our initial draft presentation, we offered to hold space for Squamish Nation very dearly and closely when they're ready and have capacity to join us in those conversations. And drawing back to what Ms. Goldbeck said prior, that commitment still stands.
Okay. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. I'd like to make an observation about how archives are treated or where they may be inserted in the presentation. Starting with the description of community aspirations, it's on page 13, where there's heritage discussed as well as Indigenous voices. We must also keep in mind that we have 150 years of shared history too. But I just wanted to make the point that for Indigenous voices, facilities are also important. And that includes archives and exhibit venues, like the entire arts community, the Squamish Nation community, also is lacking for exhibit venue opportunities. And I see in that description on that page, maybe there may be opportunity to remember this or highlight this. I have marching orders from Donna Billy, Squamish Nation elder, to raise the issue of archives. They are very concerned that they have nowhere in the community of Squamish to place things that are of museum value or need protection. They do not wish to, and I can speak for Donna for sure, send things to Whistler and North Vancouver. We just do not, we're missing facilities. So my point here is First Nations, Squamish Nation is also desiring these facility issues to be addressed. It's not just a matter of voices, it's is the records and physical objects, presenting them, protecting them. Also, with respect to archives, there's a reference to heritage is protected in Tactic 1.5. that also includes protecting them in archives. And on the same theme, there is a reference in Tactic 6.2 to archival services, but first we need the physical archive. So there's the protection facility is also needing, not just the services of retrieving them from somewhere. Of course, that's obvious, but we shouldn't overlook it. I'd like to then address another area that I think would be helpful. I think we can anticipate it will come up, has come up already from various groups, including Britannia Mine Museum and Squamish, well, virtually all of the groups, and that is understanding respective roles. I feel that there is, in a few places, there is a lack of clarity as to what we can expect from nonprofit groups and what is the role of the district, respectively. So this comes up in Tactic 1.5. There is discussion of sustainable model, and there is discussion of support where possible efforts of groups. There's also discussion in 6.2 of a framework for conservation, but nowhere is there recognition of the blunt reality that only district can write policy. And that while there's much work, and that is pointed out, I think very, very well in the report, there's much work that can be done within the arts, cultural, and heritage community, but we cannot adopt policy or be the final arbiters of policy. And this is going to catch up to us unless we address this gap. And we're unique in BC without having policy. So that the description of the roles in those three sections that I mentioned, I think, is a little bit vague as to distinguishing that. And there is also a reference in 5.3 to crowdsourcing a cultural heritage map. We've already done that. In fact, it's probably been done too often. Now we need to get busy and produce one that can be adopted and endorsed by the District of Squamish for planning purposes. I think we need to take a next step now, that step to produce an official inventory, which doesn't have any consequences, but it is one that is recognized for planning purposes. We don't have that. And I think that is the next step rather than crowdsourcing. And so this comes back to policy and the district's role in that. And there are three elements that we are missing in the District of Squamish, and that is an inventory, a registry. A registry is a little bit more heavy-handed, but that's what evolves from an inventory. We don't have either. And we don't have a context statement for context statements for in the way that other municipalities use them. Just for example, the sawmill site, that's how the Sikh community came here. Yet there's no statement in the OCP or in anything whatsoever that points this out, that the entire existence of the Sikh community of Squamish is attributed to that site. And this should come up when we think about public art. We have a context statement where this is mentioned. So these are tools, but they are only tools that they can be written up by anybody, but only council or the district can adopt them. So these are things I know will come up in future discussion. I just thought I'd highlight them at this time. And two final points is, I think that there is some, we have not in council, this council, spent much time talking about timing and priorities. But if I look back to 2005, when the staff suggested that these policy tools I've mentioned should be underway, council said, we're too busy with big projects. We got too much happening. And that's what we're saying still today in 2020. So a general observation, perhaps it's time we do look at where we're at in timing and not have staff take signals that, well, really, what are they as signals? Because we don't really discuss it. We haven't discussed it. And back in 2005, they came up with the same excuse. We're too busy. Finally, I wanted to suggest that under page 27 of the plan and 37 in our document, the idea of an arts, cultural, and heritage sector-wide networking event is just so sound and useful. And I'm so glad that it's so well spelled out there. That's a terrific idea, and I think that much will come in the way of progress with that suggestion if we implement it. So a tactic 3.1. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing nothing further, Ms. Dicker, can you perhaps summarize some of the feedback you got, just so council and you are on the same page?
I'm going to try my best to do that for you. So we wanted some clearer language in terms of the approach to the reconciliation and the role of Squamish Nation in this strategy. Tactic 1.2, we were going, move tactic 1.3 to a 1 to 3 year term. Reference the policies of the official community plan. Maybe a look at the definition of heritage to bring in archival, mentions of archival services, and perhaps also geological features. A list of desired facilities without priorities. Roles of social services within the strategy. And also some comments about the archives and exhibit venues and how that could be integrated into the strategy further. And then Councillor Anderson's comments about heritage, which I haven't summarized quite well enough, and I'm wondering if the minute taker has, but I'm sure I can re-listen to the video on those.
Council, any comments on those? Mayor Elliott?
I think it's a fairly good summary, although I don't necessarily agree with all the points. And I think the thing to remember is that this is going back out to public consultation. And so council's feedback for me should be weighed in line with what the community provides back to us on this really splendid strategy that's in front of us. So, so I won't, at this point, necessarily nitpick on some of the things I disagree with in your summary. I don't agree with them all, but I think for me, it's more important what the community has to say at this point, and then council will get to debate these things when we see the final draft.
Further comments? So like the last time, I'm looking for a motion. The staff recommendation is that the draft arts, culture, and heritage strategy be presented to the public for feedback prior to be received at council at a future regular business meeting, with the comments of council at the Committee of the Whole meeting of May 26, 2020 considered. Councillor Herford, moving. And Councillor Stoner seconding. Further discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. My intent was to have a recess now. It is 5 to 4. Believe it or not, we're getting closer back to schedule. So I'd like to take a 10-minute recess. We'll come back at 5 after 4 with the special events bylaw and the last item on the agenda. And I will mention just before we step away, there will be one late item with respect to the curling club to be considered, a letter of support. So, thank you. And welcome back. We are now back in session. And we are on item 4, sub 3, District of Squamish Special Events Bylaw number 2748/2020. Go ahead, Ms. Dicker.
Thank you, Council. For those of you at home, my name is Sarah Dicker, and I am currently the Acting Manager of Arts and Culture. I'm joined today by Devin Guest, who is the Director of Recreation, and Natasha Goldbeck, who is the GM of Community Services. We're here today to present the draft version of the District of Squamish Special Events Bylaw number 2748/2020 for feedback prior to coming forward for first 3 readings at a regular business meeting.
Okay, hold on.
We can move to the slides. Robin, you got the slides?
No, we have no
Sarah,
slides yet.
I'm trying to get the presentation to come up.
Okay.
Hang on.
Maybe just hold off for a second.
I just need, yep. Oh, there it is.
We're making progress.
It's blank.
Maybe we're not making progress.
Yeah, we're not making progress.
There you go.
Should I go ahead without the slides and, oh, okay.
Hang on. When I hit that, it just goes blank. Come on, see, it won't go. Oh, it's up there, okay. It's
Yeah.
not on my
Not on
screen.
my screen yet.
Yeah.
But it says I'm receiving one.
Let me try again.
Can anybody in council see the presentation?
No, hold on, let me see if I can get it.
No.
Somebody sing the Jeopardy song.
Will that help you?
Still working
It's
on
up
it.
there, but see how it's on this, it's there, but it's not there. Okay, hold on, let me close it in. Sorry, everybody. It's always gotta be one presentation every day, every council. I have to hit share, share screen again. It would help if I had a mouse that worked too. I can't find my mouse. Would help if you didn't have a leadite for a.
Careful, I'm quite sensitive.
Okay, let's see, what's it doing? Go, yay!
Yay!
Hey. Ta-da. Okay.
Okay, Sarah.
We can probably go to slide number 3.
Okay.
Time marches on.
Thank you. So the background on bringing this bylaw forward is that we have currently got a special events policy which was established in 2013. And currently the policy provides guidelines to event producers and DOS staff. There's one process stream for every applicant, doesn't matter the type of event. And the policy was established based on increased numbers of events and to establish an initial process for staff and event organizers. The policy was also meant to assist the community. Next slide. So during the process of the creation of the Arts, Culture, and Heritage Strategy, the need for change came to light during the community stakeholder and community engagement. The community was looking for a process to self-organize and create low-barrier neighborhood events. An action identified in the Arts, Culture, and Heritage Strategy is to assist in the creation of an eventful community that offers opportunities to participate in year-round events with recognized events occurring in each month of the year. The bylaw provides us with the ability to establish a process by which neighborhood events could self-organize and by which major planned events or bigger events are clearly guided. Next slide, please. So the shift to a bylaw versus an updated policy was based on the growth in the types of events that we are seeing. The demand for low barrier events and also to bring Squamish in line with other municipalities surrounding in the Blue Sky Corridor. For example, Whistler, Pemberton, and the FLRD all have bylaws for special events. This provides consistency for event organizers. Our shift to bylaw also provides enforcement framework if deemed necessary. Next slide, please. So the process will largely remain the same for event organizers. However, a new category of neighborhood events is established for the manager to consider upon receiving applications. The bylaw better outlines the process for the applicant and allows the discretion to staff as not all events fall into standard categories. All applicants will begin by using a special event application. The manager will then identify which category the event falls under and provide directions on requirements for a special event permit. Neighborhood events will not require a permit. Special event permits will be then granted by the General Manager of Community Services. Next slide, please. So this chart shows an overview of the 3 categories of events established by bylaw: major planned events, community events, and neighborhood events. So for all event categories, an application will be required. The categories are then split down into based on size. So over 750 attendees will trigger a major event application. Over 250, but less than 750 will trigger a community event application, and less than 250 will trigger a neighborhood event. Also to be considered in the neighborhood event category will be that there is no impact on public safety or traffic, and no impact and no alcohol will be served, and that the event is not commercial in nature. Next slide, please. We also want to acknowledge COVID-19. At the time that this bylaw is coming forward, many events have had to be altered or canceled, and this bylaw will allow for more neighborhood-style events to happen naturally. So we are anticipating an increase in smaller-scale events, and so this provides a process for that. The bylaw also requires all event organizers to adhere with all enactments, and that would include provincial health orders. So next slide, please. Our recommendation is that Council provides feedback on the draft District of Squamish Special Events Bylaw, and that staff brings forward to a future Council meeting for readings. I'll now take questions and comments.
Thank you. Once again, Council, similar to the last item, we're looking for feedback. And we'll start off with questions and then comments so that staff can kind of organize the feedback, and we'll deal with that at the end. So first of all, I have Councillor French, and a second, others may be. Councillor French is the only one I have at the moment, but go ahead.
Thank you. Just on the topic of insurance, in the bylaw, there's no mention of specific amounts, like 1 million, 5 million, 10 million in liability. Just, I saw a reference to adequate insurance as required by the general manager. So I'm curious about this. Is this best practices now of not specifying amounts? And how would the general manager know what liability amount might be appropriate?
Through the chair, thank you for your question, Councillor French. Basically, when events come to the District of Squamish, we will establish a level of insurance that is appropriate through coordination with MIA, and then given the type of event, a higher level may be specified than what we establish in the bylaw. So it is deemed best practice to have that appropriate level of insurance be recommended through staff.
Okay, and follow up, so MIA, Municipal Insurance Authority, is that who that is?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay, and Councillor Pettengill, Mayor Elliott, and Councillor Stoner.
Okay, thank you. Two things. What is a commercial event? Because I think we have free events or with commercial vendors at them, or food trucks, or, you know, it might be, there is a fee, but it's for a not-for-profit, and there may or may not be commercial vendors as part of that. So when is it a commercial event versus not?
Good observation. I think a commercial event is defined in the bylaw as an event that is for profit. So either could be considered. I think in the circumstance that items are being sold and a profit is being made, that would establish that it was a commercial event.
And just to push back on that, I think, like Wind Festival and a bunch of things, I think there are sort of that booth, there's people that are trying to make money, but or the Sikh Festival, for example, that I don't know if I would consider those as commercial events necessarily. And maybe it doesn't matter at the end of the day. I'm just sort of not sure that piece fully makes sense to me. Yeah.
Ms. Guest, do you want to weigh in? Go ahead.
Just to further Ms. Dicker's comment, it would be in the context, a commercial event would be deemed in the context of for-profit in the absence of a non-profit status or charitable status.
Of the organizer as opposed to people participating. Okay, thank you. The other thing, there is a number of details, and I guess, it seems that we are trying to enforce things that I think other bodies normally enforce, or there's things I wasn't sure why we're asking for the information. So there's information about drones we wanted, but I think a federal agency takes care of that. There's a bunch of details about who all the vendors are and what kind of food are they serving, and I thought Vancouver Coastal Health kind of took care of that thing. We wanted details about amplification, and while that might be us, I wonder why we would want those details as opposed to like, you can't go above 120 decibels, or, and if you go up too loud, you'll get a fine. So are we getting involved in too much management of these events?
It will be at the discretion of the general manager to require such details. However, it is in the interest of the municipality to ensure that event organizers are adhering to any provincial or federal legislation. It would be irresponsible for us to permit an event that was not in line with those regulations, and so requiring a certification or a verified certification that it has been approved by those bodies would be recommended.
To further Ms. Dicker's comment as well.
Go ahead.
It's important for the municipality not necessarily to endorse or approve, obviously, other jurisdictions' permit process, but it is very important for the district to understand the plan under which those permits are being granted.
Okay. Councillor Pettifor? Yeah. I have Mayor Elliott, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Okay, so I think I have a bit of a bias, and I know you covered this in your slides, but in my mind, policy equals nimble and bylaw equals set in stone. And when we're talking about special events, I get a little bit nervous that we'll lose some of the flexibility we have to accommodate unique situations, or just being a little bit more flexible. So can you put my mind at ease that this is not tying your hands unnecessarily?
Thank you for your question, Mayor Elliott. I think that the intention in the bylaw is to provide clear guidelines but it also provides flexibility in that the manager can categorize an event based on the most similar type of event. There is some flexibility. Both feel that it's going above and beyond the policy in that regard, as the process is pretty much remaining the same. We're just making it more transparent for the community. Another thing to consider as well is that the clear process for the community when decisions are made is outlined in the bylaw versus the policy, which is quite ambiguous. And so a lot of the behind-the-scenes work that goes into events is not necessarily seen by the community, and the decision-making is based on those behind-the-scenes work that is not established in the policy.
Okay.
Does that make any sense?
Does that make sense?
It helps. It certainly helps. One of the other questions I want to explore is just around the idea of neighborhood events. And these are events that are described as not having a real impact. They're not expected to have a real impact. So we ask them to submit their application at least 30 days before the event. But nowhere in our bylaw do we talk about our turnaround time. So obviously a lot of work is going to go into those commercial events and community events. But what's our commitment if this is supposed to be sort of an organic kind of like, I want to have a neighborhood block party to celebrate the end of the pandemic? What's our commitment to get back to these smaller groups in a timely fashion?
I think that we have quite a quick turnaround in terms of response to those type of events. I certainly receive event applications by email and can make a decision on what will be easy for the district to permit and what will require a lot more work. For the community stuff, neighborhood events, the only reason we're requiring an application is so that we can establish whether or not the park is being used for another event, whether or not they require restricted access to the park, etc. So for public spaces management, the application is required. However, for the neighborhood events to go forth and do, once we've established that it can happen, they can go and make it happen.
And then it talks about neighborhood events not needing a permit, but then it goes on to say that the manager can decide whether someone needs a sign permit or a solid waste plan, or can that still happen to neighborhood events? And the reason I'm asking is because we actually have a zero waste strategy, and I would really, really like it if we were promoting a zero waste event, regardless of whether it's commercial or neighborhood, that people are thinking about that.
Yeah, so actually one of the discussions that I've been having with the sustainability coordinator for the district is creating a set of guidelines for events. And so we certainly have discussed having those guidelines available for neighborhood events as well as the bigger events. Let's say bigger events are required, but we can always provide those guidelines in order to have zero waste events or set out to achieve zero waste events in neighborhoods.
Certainly, I would like to see some language around that for all levels of events. And then I guess my last question is around, there's a whole bunch of clauses, sorry, just let me find them, where the general manager can refuse, suspend, or cancel a permit. But the reasons are a bit strange to me, because we wouldn't accept the application if they were breaking some of these rules. So I just wonder why we wouldn't use sort of figuring that all out on the application form versus, and then just shortening this section to say the general manager has the ability to cancel a permit.
I think the general manager ability to cancel the permit would come up if false representations were made, or if the circumstances completely changed from the application stage to the stage where the event needed to be canceled. We also established that the general manager level would be more appropriate than the manager level to make those determinations.
Okay, I just wondered, maybe to Councillor Pettingill's point, whether there's things we can capture more in the application phase versus in the bylaw. And finally, you mentioned public health orders. And and you talked about this would include enactments, including public health orders, but most of the things we'll be concerned about if people are having events this summer are not public health orders, they're public health recommendations. And so wherever we choose to put this language, we have to be careful because we don't have the ability to enforce those things, but we should see a plan that requires physical distancing, hand hygiene, because those things aren't under a public health order. It's just the size of the gathering that is. So however we want to phrase that as we're putting this out to the community, I think we have to be very careful. Thanks.
Thank you. Then I have Councillor Stoner and Councillor Herford. Did I see your hand? No? Okay, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you, through the chair. So also just seeking some clarity on the different groups or types of events that we've identified, which I think are helpful breakdowns. But so I'm thinking, for example, I want to have a barbecue with 50 people in the park and there's going to be alcohol. Is that a neighborhood event, or because there's alcohol served, is it a special event?
If alcohol is being served, it would trigger a requirement of a liquor license application, and so we would categorize that as a special event.
Okay, so I think that the language in 8C2 needs some form of clarification. So and maybe it's 8B and 8C. So it says the following special events do not require a permit. And C2 is special events held outdoors that can facilitate the attendance of less than 250 people. And then also the clause around applied for by a local business or community or ratepayer association, I find a little bit confusing. I'm not entirely sure why that is there. So if somebody was coming up from Vancouver down from Whistler and wanted to host their wedding in Squamish, does that exclude them from requiring a permit?
No, that would not exclude them from applying for a permit. But it wouldn't exempt them from requiring. So I think that language there for me, to me it reads that it's only a local society or ratepayer that is able to, that does not require a permit. I won't go into detail. I think I can work on cleaning up that language for you.
Thank you. And then, yeah, I think that was kind of the major piece to me, was just the differentiation between that kind of clause in 8 and the other definitions that we had of special event versus neighborhood event in the preamble to the bylaw. To me, we're a little bit mismatched.
Councillor Stoner, you finished? Thank you. I wanted to go back to the question around commercial event, because I think I might have missed something in the explanation. Was that where it's a business, or is it the possibility that a nonprofit might conduct a commercial event?
The idea is that it would be a for-profit entity holding an event for commercial purposes.
Okay, and the reason I ask that is when the last few words of that definition, or it's for the purpose of a business or otherwise for profit or gain, and a lot of not-for-profits will charge a fee and have an event, and they'll want to make a profit on it, not lose money on it, because it's a fundraiser for whatever, some purpose. I mean, they rarely want to do those things at a loss. So if the intent is that would not be a commercial event, but rather a community event, then where would they be if they wanted to charge a fee? So I think maybe between those two definitions, we decide whether the one or the other and somehow expand the language. or narrow it. Because right now, something like the Railroad Museum, for example, having an event charging a fee for would fall between the two. But in any event, I'll leave that with you on that point. Are there any other questions, Council? Go ahead, Ms. Digger.
Sorry, I think that I just wanted to clarify that if it was a for-profit event held on private land, that wouldn't necessarily fall under this bylaw. So a special event on private land, unless it impacts traffic or community services, then we would not be providing a special event permit for that.
Well, but back at that point, for example, I've even helped organize fundraising events at Brennan Park, for example, for the Hospital Foundation and different things like that, and where significant fees were charged for the event in the expectation that there'll be a significant profit going to the hospital or the Hospital Foundation. So I think that's maybe, perhaps it was a bad example using the Railroad Association, but that's maybe more the type of thing I'm thinking about is, would that become a commercial event because they are charging a fee, or is it a community event because they are fundamentally a not-for-profit? So I'll leave that with you to, I guess, think about where you want to put that. And I don't have a particular position on that one way or the other. I'll just leave that with you. Ms. Guest, go ahead.
May I offer some further clarification that the intent of council is that non-profit or charitable status organizations charging fees for fundraising would continue to be classified as not-for-profits, and that is the general intent around the council table.
Are you asking the question?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll come back to that then. So that's one of the outstanding pieces of feedback we'll get some consensus on. Are there any other questions, Council, or any other comments now? Mayor Elliott.
I just noticed at the end of the draft bylaw, it has read first, second, and third time, all in one day. And I'm hoping with our next presentation that we'll actually have a public hearing, or we don't need one for this?
We don't need a public hearing.
So can we do all 3 readings in a day?
We can do all 4 readings in a day under the order.
Well, I know we can do it under the order, but for
We can do
transparency.
3, and then the next week we
Okay.
can do adoption
It's the zoning.
for the next meeting.
Okay. It looked like we were going to try and all do it on a day.
3 readings and then adoption, so 4 readings for a bylaw.
Okay. Councillor Herford.
Thank you. And Councillor Race's point around the fundraising, and maybe we're just don't want to take us backwards, but I do think it's a very important point, and the language around distinguishing that is crucial, as you'll have a commercial entity of some sort taking on some project that's going to benefit a community, a nonprofit, and it's a fundraising event, and how we really, the language there I think is very important, and we don't leave any gray areas or any loopholes for in this regard. So as I started thinking that one through, I think it's critical to get that correct.
Okay. Further comments, Council, before I ask staff to just summarize the feedback? Councillor Pettengill.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess I'm not sure we have the balance right between facilitating and enabling events and then protecting, making sure everything is done properly. I'll go back to some of the lists of vendors and all the food they're serving. Can't we just require VCH's approval or proof of their approval as opposed to that detail? And I'm just, I'm thinking about burden on our staff as well. I think communication when this goes out is going to be important, and maybe I read it a bit too quickly, but when I first read this, I didn't understand that community events were exempted from a lot of these requirements, and I was thinking, this was me, I would just start to read this and walk away. I wouldn't want to do an event. I would find it sort of discouraging. So making sure people are clear about what we're doing. And then, you know, I was thinking about the How Sound students, not sure if the Environment Club is the exact name, but I don't think they're a registered society. They've had a couple of events which could have crossed that 250-person threshold. So how do we make it easy for a group like that to have an event is sort of in the back of my mind. And I think in my mind that's the kind of thing we want to facilitate. But if they fall into this sort of mid-tier, there's a whole bunch of big requirements here which will be very intimidating to them. And so do we need sort of a staff position that actually helps someone go through the process and does a lot of the legwork, or can we pull back some of these requirements? Or, yeah, I'm just sort of not entirely sure we've got the balance right here. For the big ones, I'm okay. I expect a big event, you need these in all these things in place, and I want to have that understanding that you have that, but that mid-tier and the smaller tier, I'm a little less comfortable.
Did you have your hand up to respond, Ms. Digger? Did I? No? Okay. Any further comments? I will just make the comment, because that last statement sort of twigged it to me, but the definition of person means an individual, partnership, association, corporate organization, etc. Typically, it's a legal entity, a person in law. So the group, such a bunch of students at How Sound, by themselves probably are not the legal entity. And under these definitions, it would be the actual individual that goes up to the counter and asks for the permit, that holds the permit on behalf of the other group, which sometimes places challenges on them, but I think that's just the reality of an unincorporated ad hoc group of people that come together for things like that. So, but I had staff wanted to comment, and then Councillor French. Go ahead, Ms. Digger.
On the definition of a person, that comes from the community charter, and so that's the definition that we carried through into this bylaw.
Councillor French?
Chair, just following your thought and Councillor Pettingill's point, based on my experience with events like the Testamental and Squamish Triathlon and some of the other things I've been involved with, the thought of a group like the example being the Environment Club from How Sound Secondary School, if that organization is putting together an event that is going to pull together 250 people, that is a group that I would want more than any others to be aligned with this policy. Because that's the level of event organization that's probably pretty low if we're talking about students. And a group that size, in my mind, really needs regulation. So that makes me a bit nervous to try and loosen things up for a group like that is trying to pull off an event of that size. I wouldn't want that to be loose for a group like that and a community organization like that. That's where things can go sideways.
Mayor Elliott.
Okay, so this is where I trip over bylaws versus policies sometimes, but with the bylaw, then if I'm holding a neighborhood event, or a protest, are you going to give me a best practices guide to holding my neighborhood event? So obviously I don't need a permit, but you do want to encourage me to have a zero waste event. You do want me to encourage to, if I'm going to decide to block roads, engage in different steps. So like what accompanies this? In the same that we have all like a noise bylaw, and but we also have good neighbor guidelines that accompanies all the get along with your neighbor kind of bylaws we have, which are hard to read and legalistic. We have a good neighbor guideline booklet. Is the same true for neighborhood events? Are they going to get this sort of guideline to how to hold a successful neighborhood event?
That would be something that would be rolled out with the adoption of this bylaw, would be a set of guidelines for a neighborhood style event to help grassroots events further themselves and self-organize.
In my mind, we want them to be really successful so that we don't need to over-regulate this.
Yes,
Like
that is the intent of.
So I can see like why we want to handhold and dot all the I's and cross all the T's for those major events. And there's a different pathway for these folks that want to do something smaller, but we still want them to meet a bar, but they can meet it on their own. Am I right in thinking that?
Seeing no further comments, staff, do you want to summarize the feedback issues? And we'll come
Sure.
to one that's actually, go ahead. I won't interrupt.
I'll do my best. Sorry. So what I've noted in the feedback is that they're going to see some clarification in H, B, and C in terms of who the bylaw applies to. Guidelines for neighborhood events, along with solid waste guidelines established. Clarification on commercial events and fundraisers. And if council wants to weigh in further on that, that would be great. And then I think we had some conflicting comments about the smaller events there at the end in Councillor French's comments and Mayor's comments on the 250 threshold.
Just on that point, 8B says the following special events require a permit. It doesn't include a commercial event, does it? It should include a commercial event?
The commercial event is can be a major planned event or a community event, and so
Well,
it's
I think
not.
it does have it. I'm sorry, I just missed it. I just misread it. I'm sorry. So, Council, the other question that came up was the definition between commercial and community event, and the question of not-for-profits having events where they want to make money, and whether that should be in the community event category or the commercial event category, and does Council have an opinion on that? Mayor Elliott. Councillor Herbert.
I think we can tighten up our definitions because in my mind, nonprofits charging a fee for events is quite common, but the fee is all put towards the service of their mandate, to fulfilling their mandate as a not-for-profit. So I think as long as we, for me, clarify that, then we would keep them out of that commercial category. They're different than a for-profit company.
Yeah. Councillor Herbert?
Thank you. Yeah, this is an interesting one. I was thinking about for-profits, encouraging them to support a community group of some sort as a fundraiser, and I'm interested in incentivizing that, but I also don't want to create a loophole where we're going to run under a different set of rules because we're giving a token amount to this group over here. So I don't know what the solution is or what the wording is there, but that's where where I'm just seeing a hole that needs some more work.
Yeah, I'm generally of the position that if it is a true not-for-profit, doing it for some kind of a community charitable activity, that it should fall into the community event category, and I'll leave it to staff to kind of tighten those definitions up. Is there anybody that doesn't agree with that particular position? Councillor Pettengill.
Well, just add another wrinkle. I mean, if it's like an ultra far right political party was registered as a not-for-profit, was doing a kids fair, so the event itself isn't attached to anything maybe objectionable, but the nature of the organization is something that a lot of people might have issues with. I don't know where that falls.
Well, I don't know either, but I'm not going down that rabbit hole because You could also say the same thing for ultra-left, so, and probably a lot in between. So there's always going to be somebody that doesn't agree with the use, but as long as it's lawful, it's lawful. And there's other laws that will dictate that, I think. So I think the question really is to separate out somebody that's in the business of making a profit by putting on a particular event versus the fundraising for community events or charities. And any other feedback, Sticker? You're mute.
Sorry, I was muted. That was it for me, unless council would like to bring anything to my attention that I may have missed.
Council, final comments? No. So once again, we have a resolution. Let me just find it. Staff recommendation, the council provide feedback on the draft District of Squamish Special Events Bylaw 2748-2020. And that staff bring forward to a council meeting for readings, taken into consideration the comments made by council, the committee of the whole meeting, May 26, 2020. Somebody prepared to move that? Moved by Mayor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Herford. Further discussion? Call the question, all in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. And
Thank you. Thanks, council.
Busy afternoon for the arts group, the sticker. We are now on item 4, sub 4, the addition to the agenda, municipal hall reopening, safety plan, etc. Ms. Glendale, the floor is yours.
She's on mute.
And you're on mute, Ms. Glendale.
Joking there somewhere. I will start again. Nice to see and hear you, Council. This afternoon, Linda Glendale, CAO at the district, and trusting that Robin is lining up the presentation to go with my verbal presentation. While she's doing that, what I can say is that what staff have put together, so what I'm presenting ultimately is a compilation of a lot of staff work. I'm going to start with an update on really going back to the beginning of COVID and just very briefly where we've been with the EOC, where we're at, and then in terms of business continuity and the other restart recovery plan, where we're headed. And a large component of that at this point is reopening the doors at Municipal Hall for front counter service to accept tax payments, sell transit passes, as well as the planning side of the counter. And then the last item will be council discussion about options for how to engage the community and have them actually participate in council meetings beyond the streaming. So I will try and keep it as brief as possible. The initial response to COVID was March 11th, over 2 months ago now. Some days it feels like that was yesterday, and some days it feels like it was a whole era ago. So March 11th, Megan Latimer, who is on the call with us as well, if you have questions for her, contacted me, and we opened the EOC level 1. And it was myself, Megan, as the emergency management liaison. I have a coordinator here. Communications officer, Christina Moore, and then human resources risk management, which was Anita Blake. And the four of us, in hindsight, we did open level 2 rather quickly, but nonetheless, the four of us were flat out 7 days a week trying to, or not trying to, working on the response. So Robin, if you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So the main things that the four of us were working on, and every decision that was with Mayor Elliott, with the EOC, right away the decision was all of our decisions will be based and aligned with provincial health guidelines, so that our decisions wouldn't be based on emotion or arbitrary. They wouldn't be arbitrary.
So essentially, impact on operations. So what do we need to close? Do we need to close? You know, March 11th, we weren't looking at closing anything, and things changed very, very quickly after that, I'm sure, as you know. Employee impact was huge. So Anita and her team did an absolutely stellar job working pretty much around the clock, I would say, on what does this look like in terms of staff leave, you know, if they've been in contact with someone, if they're afraid to come to work, how do we put in protocols in place? How do we pay employees for different situations? So that was a huge amount of work. Communication to the employees as well was frequent and changing every day and really challenging, but we worked very hard to make sure we kept them in the loop. Community communication as well. Christina, as you know, does a fabulous job in any event, certainly here. And I'm sure you remember that a large part of that was around the enforcement. And once we were trying to interpret those provincial public health orders, what did that look like for us in terms of enforcement, our CMP? How do we lead that to the community? And that was a huge part of it. Well, so that was the first initial phases. So next slide. So March 16th, 5 days later, we elevated to level 2. That was when the public health order came in that there would be no gatherings of more than 50 people. And with that public health order, that was at the point that we made the decision to close the Brennan Park Recreation Center. We closed our playgrounds because of the high-touch surface, but we didn't close our parks with the idea that people still needed green space and open space. We closed Municipal Hall in-person service, but continued all other business. And at that point, anyone who could would work from home. We also put in an essential service plan, and Public Works particularly, of course, continued working, and a lot of protocols were in place for them to socially distance and stay safe. Kudos too to the rec staff that kept spring break camps going for those that needed childcare. Next slide, please, Robin. So as I mentioned, we planned essential service delivery. It's hard to imagine now, but back in March, we weren't sure what would happen. What if the majority of our staff got sick? How would we deal with that? Which was a very new thing in light of COVID. Normally in essential service delivery, you can actually name the employees in the hierarchy. Employee safety, paramount. Mental health was something that we got on top of right away for our staff, given the challenges of this, both at work and personally, and changes, and the uncertainty. We have a great benefits program that we understand the usage did go up exponentially through this period, which is great. The employee redeployment program kicked into action very quickly, which was and continues to be an incredibly useful and impressive program, especially as it relates to helping our social service agencies. Interpreting the public health orders continued and continues. Coordinating with the other municipalities in terms of what we were doing. Preparing for Easter long weekend was a huge amount of work because at that time we were still encouraging people to stay away, not come to Squamish, and come later. Next slide, please, Robin. The concurrent work that was going on is, or has been and continues to be, economic development support of the Chamber and Tourism Squamish. The Here for Squamish campaign led by the Chamber is going on. The core leadership team and finance amended the 2020 budget in, I think, less than 2 weeks, which was rather Herculean, and kudos to Roland for helping us with that. And then we formed the business continuity team for medium-term response. And in the next few slides, I'll explain the difference between that and EOC. Next slide, please, Ron. When the province came out with phase 2 of restart, we went back to an EOC level 1. And the objective of that, to be candid, is to maintain our cast member so that as we continue to experience costs associated directly with COVID, some still qualify, be covered from the province. The EOC, as it stays at level 1, can respond to public health orders. So if something changes, we can ramp up right away. We're poised to do that. The EOC Level 1 worked on the May long weekend work, which was much less onerous than Easter, but nonetheless required some action. And as I mentioned, we're poised to respond immediately to any changes and touch wood, but in the event that public health order changes in the fall, there's a second wave. Next slide. Megan provided me a recovery example. There aren't a lot of examples out there, but Grand Forks was seen as one of the more successful ones. And it's a team effort with local government leadership as well as consultants and external organizations. And she drew together for me a sample of what we could use for the district, which we have put together and is on, I'll show you the Grand Forks model first. It's on the next slide. Robin, please.
Pardon?
Thank you. So this is the post-Grand Forks flood recovery team. So what we've built, or what Megan built, and I'm going along with it because I think it's fantastic, is the district, we're calling it Restart because it's not necessarily recovery. We think it's a bit more of a positive word. So Robin, next slide. So it's definitely recovery, but we're going with the provincial word of restart. The economy on the left, so as I mentioned, economic development is working closely with the Chamber, Tourism Squamish, the BIA. St. Mulligan and her team are spearheading the project that Council's directed around opening sidewalks and potentially closing roads and leveraging streetscapes and parks. So that is well underway, which is very exciting. Our redeployment program continues to work closely with our community social services. The bridge project was an unbelievable success that came out of this situation. The business continuity team is the team that falls under municipal service delivery. So this is where our team of combination of managers and staff are working closely together to deliver the service through the restart, and then also we're looking long term. So what happens if we do have to shut more again, like if there's another wave, and take advantage of what we learned through this process to continue to improve our business regardless of COVID. And then the financial side is how the municipality addresses and recovers based on finance. So we did amend our budget, and working with our new CFO, we'll be looking at long-term forecasting should we see a recession. Slide, please, Robin. So this is just another definition of EOC Level 1. Next slide. Definition of the business continuity team. So separate and distinct, but definitely working together. Next slide, Robin. This is just a very quick update for you. This table was provided to Council before the May long weekend. These are all of the amenities that have opened since that time. Tennis courts on the boulevard are still under repair. Next slide, Robin. The in-person customer service, we will go through more detail our plan for that. We're still targeting June 1. Brennan Park and the library, we've put 4 weeks plus. Our indoor facility planning in terms of meeting public health guidelines and doing it correctly means that will be much slower. Next slide, please, Robin. So just as a reminder, we do have principles that we apply to our restart, which we presented to Council previously, which is essentially adhering to all provincial health orders, WorkSafe BCU regulations, and they've been coming out. So just in the last few weeks to 10 days, they've come out with a number of regulations, a number specific to municipalities, which has been incredibly helpful, and templates and action plans. A third principle, which is really important, is providing service to the public and at the same time remaining low barrier, friendly, and accessible during this time when we have to physically distance, maintain hygiene and cleanliness. And then the coordination, consistency, and flexibility is among the departments in the district. Next slide, please. Just a quick reminder on our current public health order and then the guidelines. Next slide, Robin. WorkSafe BC, this is their hierarchy of controls. This is not new, but we are definitely applying it to the COVID situation. Elimination at the top refers to eliminating the hazard. Or substitution, can you do something different? So working from home, as an example. Engineering controls are then those physical infrastructure controls that can be put into place. So the physical distancing of people, plexiglass. Administrative controls are the protocols and the processes, so around the hygiene and sanitization and making sure that that's followed. And then the last is personal protective equipment. So based on this pyramid, obviously elimination is the most ideal, but when that's not possible, then you work back down to the inverse pyramid. Next slide, Robin. So the municipal hall plan, Jonas has been leading this charge and working closely with Linda Klassen, Charlene, and Conrad to reopen the front doors of Municipal Hall. And Jonas actually used a great metaphor, accommodating with a bit of humor. And when you run from a building that's burning, it's quick. So shutting down was relatively quick. Once the fire's out, we go back in. It's a little slower. We appreciate your patience while we put this report together. Things do continue to change. As I mentioned, the WorkSafe regulations have just recently come out. We sent the plan out to staff to the union yesterday and to staff this morning, so we're seeking feedback from key staff in Municipal Hall about the plan. We are still targeting next Monday for opening. I'll just briefly go through, so we based the reopening on our reopen principles, public health orders, and WorkSafe BC. So the first is elimination, and we, the original elimination was shutting the doors. So we're no longer shutting the doors, but we're controlling and limiting public access in terms of physical distancing, the number of people in the hall at a time. And Jonas and team came up with a brilliant idea. We're redeploying staff to be greeters and sanitizers. So we'll have staff at the front door, ensuring that people are physically distancing, minimizing the number of people in the building, and then also walking around and sanitizing the high-touch areas. We continue to prioritize working from home, so only those employees that need to return, because we're opening the doors, will return. We're also paying attention to those employees that are anxious to get back to work and engage, and so to do that, we're having outside one-on-one meetings with people. We have a maximum capacity at the hall for numbers, certainly in shared areas such as the lunchroom, and then the two sides are going to stay separate. Next slide, please, Robin. So our engineering controls, physical barriers, we've all become very familiar with and now expect plexiglass, whereas I think at the beginning it was quite alarming. Camilla Say has done an incredible job of sourcing plexiglass, so that will be up very shortly. And at the same time, we'll continue to encourage the public to use our online other services that don't require them to actually attend Municipal Hall. Next slide, Robin, please. So administrative controls, as mentioned, are the protocols. So signage, communication to the public, regular sanitization. And this is also an important part to talk about culture. So we spoke yesterday as a management team about the importance of safety culture, which isn't normally highlighted so much in an office environment, but rather high hazard areas. And in this case, our culture around calling each other out, physical distancing, and making sure that those safety protocols are held consistently is going to be an important and key part of this reopening. And last, next slide is the personal protective equipment. All employees dealing with cash and documents will wear gloves. Based on public health guidelines, masks are still optional, but we will be providing that. I believe that's it for Municipal Hall. Should we stop now if there's any questions before we enter into the council meeting discussion?
Sure, that sounds like a good spot to stop. So council, questions? Councillor Stoner? I didn't see anybody else's hands. So Councillor Stoner, go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. I appreciate all the hard work that staff have put into a thoughtful restart for our various services. I am increasingly cognizant of the reality that I appreciate the continued messaging of work from home wherever possible, and recognizing that some staff are anxious to get back to the office, either because they like working with their colleagues directly, but also because a lot of people don't have effective work from home space. We live in a very expensive community, and so I'm just cognizant of that and curious what we might be able to afford to staff who don't have functional workspaces at home and are keen to get back to the office for that reason, because they either have roommates or whatever reason, they don't have an effective workspace where they currently are.
Go ahead.
I can answer that through the chair. Thank you. Yes, that is certainly part of people coming back that we're alive to, and not everyone has great situations for working at home. We want to restart slowly, so we're asking those staff to hang in there as best as possible, and we want to see how the next few weeks go before we make a decision. That's why the plan has a maximum number in the hall, and then as we allow or engage with more staff coming back, we would prioritize those staff that from that point of view, whether it's that they don't have an ideal workspace at home or they're more extroverted, are more willing, the introverts say, to stereotype, are more willing to stay at home. So we would prioritize those people that need to come back. My concern as the CAO is not going too quickly, and I recognize that the need for engagement and the frustrating workspace at home still has to be number two over safety, and I do want to make sure that we trickle people back. But it's a fabulous point, and recognizing the strain that people are under that are working from home. Not everybody loves it, that is for sure.
Councillor Herford.
Thank you. Are people, is your intent to get the people that are coming or able to work in City Hall to come back to City Hall to their normal hours, or splitting a mix of at home and in City Hall to sort of fade back in, or to help with sort of some of these issues that we just touched on with wanting to sort of get back to work, but sort of pushing capacity of City Hall? Or how have you been adjusting that?
Through the chair, thank you. That's a great question. Most people that are coming back are not coming back full-time 5 days a week, so that we are able to have more people coming back staggered and working part-time at the home, part-time at home, which helps address Councillor Stoner's first question.
Let me ask, I think one of the earlier slides it said the programming at Brennan Park started May 18th. Did that actually happen?
Did. Very exciting. It's outdoor programming. So on May 18th, staff hosted a pole walking camp in the park and something on bicycles, I think, with kids. And sorry, I don't have more detail than that, but there were pictures and staff were excited, and they continue to grow that programming, and they're working very hard behind the scenes right now on long-term planning for the facility and programming, especially as it relates to summer camps, recognizing the childcare challenges people have.
So right now it's outdoor versus indoor. I think somehow I missed that comment or that announcement. But for the summer, for example, are we saying now that we anticipate having more or less regular summer programming, outdoor programming?
We haven't made that determination yet, but staff are working on it. The goal is to provide as much as we can safely. I just don't know what that looks like right now, and certainly that longer term. And when I say longer term, I mean beyond May and June will be coming to council shortly.
Ms. Goldbeck, did you want to add a comment? Did I see your hand?
No, but just if you want more detail, I can provide it. That's fine to move on.
Okay, thank you. No other comments, council? I guess carry on, Ms. Glendale.
Great. Thank you. So that's Municipal Hall. And as mentioned, we are targeting June 1, but that will depend on employee feedback and how much of that requires us to pivot with the plan. We're not expecting a lot, but we do want to receive that feedback before we commit. So the next is council meeting public participation. The objective being, how do we get the public participating in the meetings during this time of phase 2 restart, outside of just streaming. So as council knows, the Ministerial Order 139 allows public hearings to be conducted electronically. So, and our procedure bylaw allows special business meetings to be conducted electronically, which is what we're doing now. Staff have been working very hard, Charlene specifically, and Robin has been supporting, as well as Conrad in IT, and then Jonas in terms of dovetailing with the Municipal Hall aspect of things. Next slide, please. Again, there are legislative requirements, as you know, for public hearings and for the benefit of the public. That follows under the Local Government Act, and now we have a new ministerial order. Next slide, please. So staff asked for council to provide feedback in terms of hosting council meetings that would include public participation, whether in person and electronically. And here are some common themes. Of course, number one, stating the obvious, is safety. And then the rest of your points there. Next slide, please, Robin. Staff sought feedback from other municipalities as well, reaching out to see what others were doing. At this time, none of the local government survey will be hosting any kind of in-person attendance at council meetings. They are all looking at hosting public hearings electronically in the near future, but nobody is having physical attendance. Next slide. So, in the memo that council has, I did go back through the public health orders, principles. WorkSafe BC doesn't apply to council members. That said, because we're always involved in council meetings, we did apply WorkSafe BC regulations. And nonetheless, there's practices, and of course, we want council to be safe as well. So, given that, and we look forward to council discussion. However, our recommendation at this time, my recommendation, is that we continue with electronic meetings only until such a time as we're further into phase 2 and understand what this restart looks like, what the public health orders look like, and then what the fall brings in September. Especially as it relates to council chambers. Staff did measure it out, and every council member can fit 5 around the horseshoe, 2 more at a separate table, and then 2 staff. That said, it's tight room with poor ventilation. I can see people grimacing. And that is one of the things in the research that is a high risk, is being in an enclosed space over a period of time with poor ventilation. So council members did indicate their preference of how they want to participate and different options. Do they stagger? Does everyone stay electronically, etc.? If council does want to have more people attend, our recommendation is that we do it in an alternate location that's larger. In terms of public participation, the Blue Jeans event tool, which is not what we're currently using, allows for public participation. We did use it for the lecture series with the in-tickets, and we found it quite successful. It also allows people to phone in, and that is really key, I know, for council as well as staff, that people that may not have the technology can still phone in to an electronic meeting. And then the other recommendation is that in terms of getting this in place, getting the Blue Jeans event tool up and running, having public participation at a Blue Jeans event meeting where there really isn't true, like it's not a hearing. And then once it's a well-oiled machine, we would host public hearings beginning in July electronically. The other recommendation is that we would revisit this in September and then start to think about public participation in person, depending on the public health orders. Those are the recommendations. The next couple of slides are next steps based on those recommendations. I can go through those, or I can answer council questions at this time.
We'll pause and we'll see if there are any questions about that, council. Seeing nothing, carry on.
Okay, great. So at this time, assuming that at some point we will have physical public attendance at council meetings during our COVID period, staff are working on a safety plan and a logistics plan. So the safety plan is stating the obvious, and the logistics is around the technology, the location, the size of council chambers. Having public attend is not advised at all. So the logistics would be, where do we have that? How do we do it with technology? It's very difficult and, well, almost impossible if we were to have off-site meetings like we have had in the past for public hearings every week. We would need a location that we could keep the technology set up. Concurrent with this, because that's occurring right now, based on our recommendation to stay electronic for the balance of the summer, is to configure and set up and train for using the Blue Jeans events tool starting next week. We put together a communication plan so that the community is aware that this work is happening and how they can participate once that is in place. Slide, please. And then the week of June 8th, we would do test meetings with council, so similar to what we did with Blue Jeans at the beginning, so not a true meeting, perhaps on a Tuesday morning or before the actual meeting, we would do a test meeting. And then in mid-June, we would commence meetings with electronic public participation, although these wouldn't be hearings. And the public would be able to phone in directly, be on the meeting directly as opposed to on streaming. So they would be allowed for the unscheduled public attendance, as an example, to participate. And then in July, as mentioned, we would host electronic public hearings. The communication, I believe there's another slide actually before I keep talking. 7 and 8, yes. We would debrief, of course, see how it's going. And then my recommendation is we reevaluate in September. In the interim, we would proactively look at alternate space for public attendance if that's where we decide to go. But again, I'd like to adhere to the public health orders, work safe BC, and understand over the next 2 or 3 months what the phase 2 looks like. Communication definitely will be a huge part of this, continuing to encourage people to use correspondence as an example for feedback to public hearings, how they can leverage this technology, how they phone in, all of these things are very different for them. As mentioned with the lecture series, that was very successful. That said, it could have just been one cohort that's very technically savvy, so our communication would be quite strong and frequent and consistent. So with that, I will hand it back over to Council.
Thank you. Council comments, questions? Councillor Pettengill. And I'll put myself on the list.
Thank you. In terms of public hearings, I'm wondering if the province has provided or could be asked about this, but with a normal public hearing, I think we kind of are obligated to let people speak and ask questions. We alternate so one person doesn't hog the mic the whole time, but the fact that people have to show up in person puts some kind of limit on that so it doesn't go endlessly. Like I've heard of public hearings going 2 days, but nothing beyond that. But with online, and in theory, people could attend from anywhere in the world. Do we have mechanisms in place to put some sort of reasonable limit on things and or to verify who is speaking at public hearings digitally?
Go ahead, Linda.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, this is definitely something staff have been talking about in terms of like the verification, the moderating. So with electronic hearings, we would have staff would moderate and the chair would chair the meeting. There are definitely logistics that need to be worked out with that. I don't know if Robin or Conrad want to speak up to the idea of verification with somebody that's on the telephone.
So others.
As far as somebody speaking at a public hearing, anybody can speak at a public hearing if they think they have an interest. So it's up to them to define if they have an interest, and it's not defined in the legislation. So we accept submissions, for example, in writing from people who may not live here, and I don't think that electronic participation would have any different kind of requirement around a submission. So it's if they believe that they have an interest, and that's what the legislation says.
Yeah, and one of the first things we ask people at a public hearing who are speaking is what their street address is, and so I think if you had somebody from the other side of the world, you could maybe just give them less credibility than somebody that was living close to the issue. And that's a determination for each councillor. Any other questions? Go ahead, Linda.
Thank you. Through the chair, the second part of that question was around managing time. And again, that's something that staff are looking at in terms of the logistics. I would have to say that moderating electronically, it's actually easier to have someone stop talking. It would be a literal cutoff, but nonetheless, the moderators in the chair could work very, diligently on reminding people that they have time limit.
Saw that happen at a funeral one time. Another story. The question or the comment I had is, and generally, I'm quite on side with staff proceeding this way. It occurs to me, though, that in the back of your mind, you have to have sort of a plan to roll it back. If there is, in fact, a second wave coming through, and when that might happen, and how intense that might be compared to the first wave. And so that's a comment, not a question, and I don't expect an answer today, but just hopefully this will keep going in one direction, but we have no guarantee of that. Mayor Elliott.
I agree with Councillor Race, and one thing that the province has done, the school district has done, is that they continue to use this idea of stages. And I wonder if it's not helpful for us to define our stages of opening or closing so that we can say to the community, this is what, 1 looks like, which is everything's closed. 2 is what we have been doing. 3 is this, and 4 is wide open. And so that if we need to move backwards, it's transparent to the community what we would be moving back to. or what we then can move forward to. And I think that would be a great way to sort of prepare everyone psychologically that there's probably movement along this scale between now and the end of this pandemic. And everyone would be aware of that from the beginning.
Seeing nothing further, are you looking for any decisions? Or is this for information?
At this point, through the chair, not looking for a motion from council, but unless there's something else that council wants to indicate, then staff will move forward with these next steps.
Okay. Councillor Pettengill.
I did just want to add one thing, and I may have mentioned it before, but and I like the Grand Forks recovery team approach and so on. But you know, I have seen a lot online the question of what are we recovering to, and so especially on the economic team and who's there. You know, we are sort of, it is the current economic sector folks that are making that determination sitting at that table. And is that the right group? Like, should some of our climate committee voices be there? Should social services be at that table in particular? Is one thing that jumps out at me. And I'm sure there are different perspectives there.
Through the chair, I'm not sure, is there a question, or was that a comment for feedback?
I guess feedback, but recognizing that different people may also have different perspectives. So I guess I would like to see some of those voices at that table. But
I think if I can build on Councillor Pettengill's comments, we do have a climate emergency and a community climate action plan. We do have a housing first policy. So it's making sure that all of those really important things don't get forgotten in the recovery model, because we should be building back better, not building back to a past. We have an opportunity to find the opportunities to make things better for all of our citizens. And I think that was the point that Councillor Pettengill was getting at. And we do have the policies and resolutions in place, I think, to already guide those discussions on your recovery team. So it's remembering to include Mr. Pickett's in the conversations where we can build back better.
Okay. Anything else, Council? Seeing nothing, I would like to just move receipt. Somebody prepared to move receipt? Mary Elliott. Seconder, Councillor French. Further comment? All in favor? Opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Glendale. There is one last item on the agenda. We've received a very late request from the Curling Club for a letter of support. So I'll remind anybody that might be a member of that club to consider whether or not they are in conflict before we deal with that. If you are, then there's nothing else on the agenda. The simple way to deal with it would be just to leave the meeting. We won't be coming back to anything else. If there is anybody, nobody's a member? Okay. So there was an email sent out earlier looking for support for gaming grants. Does anybody wish to comment on that or move support? Mary Elliott?
Yes, the Curling Club is looking for a letter of support to submit with their gaming grant application, which unfortunately the timing is a bit late. Their submission is due on the 31st, and today is a committee of the whole, so we would need to endorse that letter at next week's meeting. But I would certainly be willing to move that council submit a letter of support to the Curling Club and encourage them to let their funder know that there's a letter pending from council and it would come after the June 2nd meeting. So move that we write a letter of support.
Councillor Anderson, are you seconding? You had your hand up. Councillor Anderson? You've frozen.
No, he's still there. What's he doing?
Councillor Anderson, can you hear me? Go to Councillor Herford.
you. I'll just second that.
Okay. We'll go back for comment on that because Councillor Anderson had his hand up. And I don't know what happened to him, but if you're still there, Councillor Anderson?
He is. It shows he's still on. He might have.
I'll go to Councillor Stoner.
I, in general, think I'm supportive. I haven't seen a draft of this letter or it didn't come to my email. So if we're going to endorse next week, then that's fine. But just recognizing that I haven't seen it.
Okay. Councillor Pengill?
Actually, same for me. I was just checking my email. I don't see it in my junk folder or inbox.
Okay. I did see one. Maybe it just came to me as the chair. Mary Ellen?
We have a letter that we submitted last year on behalf of the curling club for this same gaming grant, and certainly we can provide that. It will be written by us, not by the curling club. So it will be based on that. And again, we have to endorse this at next week's council meeting, so you will see the information then. It was an email request that came in, so I don't think all of council received it.
It looks like Eric's just trying.
Councillor Anderson has left the call.
Yeah, and I think he's trying to get back in, so let's just see.
He's trying to get back in? We'll just hold on for a second in case he's trying to get back in. He's got to clear that.
How do you? Okay, well, he's not joined back in.
Okay.
Nope. There's a motion on the table. Further comment? I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Seeing nothing further, thank you, Council, and I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Herford? Seconded by Mayor Elliott. Further discussion? Anybody want to oppose this? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.